is Charlotte, and today I'm going to be doing something that I should have done in July, but I did not because I was moving and then life was chaotic. I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag, which I don't really understand what a tag is, to be honest, but I think it's just like different themes for videos and like different prompts that you can fill to like make videos that other creators are making. If I'm wrong about that, please correct me. Again, I cannot emphasize like how little of an idea I have about what I'm doing here. So with that ringing endorsement, like let's get started talking about the books that I read so far in 2024. So the first prompt for the video is the best of the year, and I chose two books for that. The first one that I chose is fiction, and it is The Practice, The Horizon, and the Chain by Sofia Samatar. It's a new sci-fi novella. She has written some of my favorite fantasy books, and I believe this is the first sci-fi that she's written. And it's a novella about a boy who is enslaved in the hold of a massive spaceship in this very rigid class-based society where the people in the hold are basically considered subhuman. He is then taken out of the hold to exchange the spaceship's university, or to attend the spaceship's university on what is basically this cultural exchange scholarship sponsored by a professor whose family comes from the hold, and she studies its culture. And this was really good. It's a really, really good examination of, I guess, what you could call like performative progressivism and like diversity in academia, contrasted with what true resistance and rebellion looks like in the face of oppression, and then also like the complexities of being in an elite academic institution as someone who is marginalized. And the other thing that is true across all of her books is that she has this really, really extraordinary prose. That's always something that matters a lot to me, and this is a book that just has really beautiful writing. I think especially like the last page or so is just really, really like almost like euphoric in a way that it's just really moving. And so I thought it had a lot of good like examination and critique of its themes, but it wasn't just like super pedantic. It also felt like it was very like emotional and moving and human in what it felt like, if human in what it was saying, and I just really loved the result. I saw some people say that it felt too heavy-handed or like obvious in its messaging, and I think I talked about this before, but it takes a lot for me to get to the point where I feel like a book is too heavy in its messaging. Um, and for me, that wasn't the case here. Like, I think that she was saying what she was saying in a really smart way, like nested in a story that's still strong and really well written and emotionally engaging in its own right. Um, I really, my dream is for her to go back to her fantasy series, which is set in a world called Alondria. Um, and I'm hoping that I can talk about those books in a video sometime soon. So yeah, I really want her to write more fantasy in that world because I just love those books a lot. But this pretty much cemented, like I'll pretty much read whatever she writes moving forward. She also has a memoir that released recently that I'm definitely going to check out. So yeah, that is The Practice, The Horizon, and the Chain by Sofia Samatar. And then I also picked up a nonfiction book as one of my favorites of the year. I chose Truth and Repair by Judith Herman. And Judith Herman is a American psychiatrist, and she's considered one of the leading trauma scholars, trauma researchers in the world. She helped develop the diagnosis of PTSD, and where a lot of the other really known researchers and practitioners of that time, like Bessel van der Kolk, based a lot of their work with returning Vietnam veterans. She was actually coming more from the second wave of feminism, so like consciousness raising groups and the idea that the personal is political around intimate partner violence and sexual assault. So I have both of the books here. So her first book, Trauma and Recovery, is basically considered like a very seminal text in the field of trauma research. And the basic idea is exploring what trauma looks like psychologically and, what is necessary for recovery. Um, and that's a really good book that I definitely recommend too. But this new one that just came out last year is called Truth and Repair. And instead of looking at, more clinical treatment, she's looking at the response, like social responses and justice responses to interpersonal trauma, like IPV and sexual assault, and looking at the system that we have now, the criminal justice system that we have now, compared to what trauma survivors themselves envision justice as. That's what the book is called, How Trauma Survivors Envision Justice. Um, and just kind of looking at, this is what we're doing now, but this is what, the people who have been through this process say, I wish I could have had this, like this is what I'm actually looking for. That feels like justice to me. And reading this book, it came at a really good time in my life. I think I mentioned maybe before in some of my videos that I was working in sexual assault advocacy, and I had just moved and started another advocacy position at the district attorney's office in my new city, and just kind of got like a very upfront view of how I was working with IPV survivors and just looking at how they encounter the system and how it treats them and the results that come out of it. Um, and it was really hard to see, and I was just having, kind of all of these questions that I've had for a long time really come to a head. And so the book just came at the perfect time, and I read it at the perfect time. Um, and what she really describes is how our legal system is counterproductive to healing for people, but also, um, very, very rarely achieves the kind of justice that it offers. And that justice isn't necessarily what a lot of survivors see as, the right kind of justice for them. She says, of the people that I've worked with on my own, the people that my colleagues have worked with, the people that I've done research with, people I've interviewed, most people want the violence to stop. They want to be believed and supported when they tell their story instead of, doubted or shamed or told they're lying or interrogated. They want to have their pain acknowledged by their community, by the perpetrator, and they want for some kind of meaningful restoration and repair. And what that looks like for different people, differs. And she talks about the different ways that these things can happen, the stories of a lot of different survivors who are trying to go about finding these things in different ways. And it really just is very resonant with the way that I think about these issues and what I've seen in my own work and kind of how to confront and try to figure out. There's a few things that I didn't totally know if I agreed with, and I think it just left me wanting to kind of do more research and read more perspectives on those like couple of issues that she talks about that I'm not totally sure about. But overall, this just felt like it kind of answered some of the questions that I've been really struggling with for a while and gave me more to think about and more to work with and more idea of what that work should like look like basically. Um, so yeah, I think that for anybody who has curiosity about the topic of trauma, like specifically intimate partner violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, things like that, these are two books that I would really recommend. So, Trauma and Repair, Truth and Repair, and Trauma and Recovery. Okay, that was a really long first answer. They're not all going to be that long. Maybe they will. We'll see. But the next prompt is best sequel. And I haven't really read that many sequels this year, but I think that this would still go to Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien, even if I had read more sequels. I'm just really happy that I'm now able to say that I have read the Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit. It was really long overdue. I don't know, I don't think that I have anything especially like unique or groundbreaking to say about these books, but they feel very just so beautiful and like comforting and nostalgic. Um, I think the sense of atmosphere that they have and just the feel that is kind of suffused like throughout the entire thing of just this like ancient, beautiful world that is like fading in some way and kind of being mourned is really special. And that's something that I realized I love in a lot of the fantasy books that I've read. And um, this is just a great example of that, of someone who did that earlier on. So yeah, I'm really happy that I finally have read all those books. I don't know if I'm ever going to try to get into, any of the more obscure Tolkien works. Um, I've heard that they can be a little bit more, I guess, demanding of the reader, but we'll see. I really am glad that I read these, so I might try to read more. So for the prompt, new release for the first half of the year that I still want to get to is going to be Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel. This is by the author who wrote KKE, which was a kind of feminist retelling of Indian mythology that seems to have been really well received as a whole. This is also a retelling of the Mahabharata, specifically the goddess of the river Ganga, and it sounds like it focuses on the relationship between her and as a mother and her son. I got an arc of this, and I'm very bad at reading arcs on time for release, but I'm excited to get to it and to have finally read something by this author because I've been meaning to read her debut for a long time, and I'm sure that I will get to that too. But yeah, I think I'm going to read this one first. The next question is new release in the second half of the year that you want to get to. And I chose Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. And I just love the sound of this, so I'm going to read the blurb, and I hope that you agree with me that it just sounds really lovely. So, a wandering fortune teller finds an unexpected family in this warm and wonderful debut fantasy perfect for readers of Travis Baldry and Sanguimandana. Tao is an immigrant fortune teller traveling between villages with just her trusty mule for company. She only tells small fortunes, whether it will hail next week, which boy the barmaid will kiss, when the cow will calve. She knows from bitter experience that big fortunes come with big consequences. Even if it's a lonely life, it's better than the one she left behind. But a small fortune unexpectedly becomes something more when a semi-reformed thief and an ex-mercenary recruit her into their desperate search for a lost child. Soon, they're joined by a baker with a need for adventure and, of course, a slightly magical cat. Tao sets down a new path with companions as big-hearted as her fortunes are small, but as she lowers her walls, the shadows of her past are closing in, and she'll have to decide whether to risk everything to preserve the family she never thought she could have. So I think that sounds nice. I am a bit leery of like cozy fantasy as a whole, especially ones that are like very transparently like retired adventurer opens a small business in a D&D setting, a la Legends and Lattes, which is compared here, but I I, I don't think that sounds like that. I find that particular niche of cozy fantasy like very derivative and like saccharine and kind of just icky to me. But yeah, like I was saying, this doesn't sound like that to me at all. I think it sounds very unique. Val being like charming and having a found family in a way that hopefully won't annoy me because I have a very fine line with like cozy charming stuff of whether I like it or not. So we'll see. Fingers crossed. The biggest disappointment of the year goes to Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I was very excited for this and I was very disappointed. I was kind of shocked by how disappointed I was. I had seen like near universal praise for it, and sometimes I'll see something that has a ton of hype and a ton of praise, and just know, that's not really my kind of book. That's not something that's really up my alley. But this did seem like it was going to be up my alley. I love that particular sort of the way that that fantasy romance was branded, like more like slower, more emotional, tender romance. I heard really nice things about the writing, and people really seem to like the atmosphere and setting as well. But this was just, for me, the romance felt very like generic and bland and like awkward and flat. And that's because that's like also how the characters felt to me, and that's also how the writing felt to me. I also thought that the premise of them being journalists on the front lines of this war between gods it was so strange how it was not actually explored that much at all. Like that entire part of the story felt like such an afterthought, but then like the characters of the romance weren't that developed either. So it just all felt so underbaked to me. Um, and then I felt like things just really came apart at the ending, and I don't think I'm going to be continuing. I've seen and heard from people, I guess, that the sequel was a lot less well received as a whole, and people who loved the first book didn't like it that much. So, yeah, I don't think that I will be considering that at all. I like the sound of some of her other stuff too, but now I'm kind of concerned that it's just going to be the same thing where the premise sounds really good. I like the general vibes and idea, but it just doesn't end up shaping out as being that satisfying of a read for me. So we'll see. I might consider something else by Rebecca Ross in the future, but for now, Divine Rivals was easily the biggest disappointment of the year so far. So the next prompt is biggest surprise, and this for me is A Crane Among Wolves by June Her. I had never heard of this author before this book popped up on my radar. It actually just came out in May this year, and she writes these young adult novels that usually involve some element of a mystery and are based in Korean history. And this one is set in the 1500s when the land was under the rule of a very violent, unstable tyrant. And in the book, a girl named Isul is trying to rescue her sister, who has been taken as a concubine by the king. And in doing so, she crosses paths with the king's brother, Prince Daeyeon, who is trying to plot a rebellion against his brother. So this was a surprise in a good way. Not only because I think this author sort of niche brings together a lot of really cool elements and turns them into something unique, but I just thought it was done really well. The central relationship between the main characters hits a lot of like young adult romance tropes, like wound tending and like, oh, we have to hide by pretending to make out against a wall in an alley, like those kinds of things that just always show up, especially in like young adult historical or young adult fantasy. But I liked it for the most part. I thought there was a lot of like depth to it, and it felt natural, and they were both very well written characters. It's definitely a heavy story that explores topics like violence against women, and how like a revolution may not actually make things better in the short term. And I thought it explored the things really well, but also just telling a story that was very gripping and compelling. And as far as I understand it, like the historical research is really good too. So, yeah, I'm really glad that I stumbled on this and enjoyed it as much as I did. And I am definitely going to be reading more of her stuff because I just think she puts together a really cool combination of different elements. Prompt is a new favorite author, and for me, that is going to be Tanith Lee. She is an incredibly prolific British sci fi and fantasy writer. I believe she died a few years ago and was very active in like the 70s, 80s, 90s. Um, I have read a number of her books before, and I've always thought that she's very like unique and talented. But this year I read one of her books called The Knight's Master, which is this series of interconnected short stories in this very lush, opulent, dark fantasy world, following like the pantheon of gods. And it just really hit for me. It's what I think elevated her up to that level of like being able to be considered a new favorite author instead of just an author who I've read a few books of and enjoy. She writes these stories in this collection that feel exactly like mythology or fairy tales, and the writing is it's very like I would almost describe it as kind of like suffocating in how like lavish and descriptive it is, like suffocating, oppressive, but just really beautiful as well. And she's kind of known, Tanith Lee is kind of known for these very, very dark stories with like a horrible amount of suffering in them and like a lot of sexual content. There is also what I noticed in this collection, and I think like looking back, I see in her other books too, is that there's also this like streak of humor and kind of these like streaks of goodness or like hope that kind of like glimmer through that make them stand out even more. Um, Now that I think about it, that's not true of all of her books, but some of them, most of the ones that I've read. Um, so I don't know. I would say like if you're interested in checking out her stuff, proceed with caution because some of them can definitely be like very dark and violent. Um, but if you're okay with that possibility, then I would definitely say check out some of her stuff. And she wrote some children's and young adult books as well as adult books, so those might be a little bit tamer. But yeah, I just loved this collection. It was so cool and so well written, and that is what has made me decide I can consider her a new favorite author. So, next prompt is new fictional crush. And this was a hard one. I thought about this for a while. I don't necessarily know if I have any new fictional crushes, but I do have a new fictional romance that I really enjoyed this year. So I decided that I would just go with that for this prompt. Um, and it's gonna take it's kind of gonna take a lot of explaining. And I feel like it's gonna make me come across as really weird, but that's okay. But I've been working on a secret project um, that I don't want to say too much about because I might post it here if it pans out. But for that, I've been replaying the Baldur's Gate games, video games with companion mods. And so, for those of you who don't know, a mod for a video game is basically like a player made addition or change to the game that then other people can download and add to their games. They can be all kinds of different things, different changes to a game. And the Baldur's Gate series is a fantasy series of video games set in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, and it has these like companion characters who accompany the main character that you're playing on their journey, and they have like their own little stories and conversations and like quests that you have to go on for them. And there's a really big modding community around those games. Obviously, for the new one that just came out, there's a big modding community, but also for the first two games that came out like more than 20 years ago, like people are still making mods for those games, and there's a huge collection of really well made mods. Um, so the one that I played and the one that has the romance that I like is for this character named Kevin, who is this tortured, broody elf ranger. Which, like, if you know me, you know that that is already going to make me inclined to like a character more. In the base game, he's a pretty minimal character. There just isn't as much character interaction in the first game as there is in the second one. Um, and his story in that first game is pretty much just that he has like a fridged wife who he needs to get revenge for. But the mod really moves past this, like being a shallow trope, to kind of explore grief a lot more, and then basically finding like hope in a new romance with the player character who you're playing as. And I thought it was really well written and sweet. I guess I can see the argument that it's still based on like a premise of the this wife being fridged and this person like even having to go on this like revenge quest. But I feel like it turns into something different from that. And I also thought that I don't know. I just liked it. I thought it was very sweet and I thought it was very beautifully written. And yeah, I wouldn't like go so far as to say that I have a crush on him as a character, unlike certain other elf men who will remain unnamed at this time. But yeah, I thought the mod was great, and I really enjoyed the romance. So the next prompt is new favorite character, and I think this is boring, but I did reread my book When We Walked in Memory, and I still have a lot of love for the main character in that, Frauke. She kind of just lives in my head, and I really like having her there. She came out as like a very raw, vulnerable character who I feel like is she feels very like messy and difficult and awkward and not necessarily the easiest head to be in, but she really defines the way that I think about like resilience and survivorhood and like clinging on to your identity and your sense of personhood under great duress and then reclaiming that in, small ways and big ways over time. So, yeah, when I reread the book this time, like that's what really stuck out to me. Is just like I really have a lot of love for her as a character, and she's probably the thing that I'm proudest of writing of anything that I've written. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that counts because it's my own story and technically I wrote it a while ago, but that just this the reread that I did this year really like reinforced how much I do love her a lot. Next prompt is a book that made you cry, and this is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu for me. This is a sci fi book. It's like interconnected short stories set in a world with a fictional global pandemic that actually came out. The book came out during our real global pandemic. And I thought this was great. I really loved it. It looks at this world that is slowly, like gradually transformed by its relationship to death in a lot of different ways, especially looking at like how the pandemic intersects with like capitalism and people trying to make a profit off of the new state of the world, and also how people like continue to survive and try to make meaning of things and connect with each other. There's also a lot of focus on Japanese culture and family dynamics in Japan and Japanese immigrants to America. So, really good book overall, and it starts like around our time period and then spans like very, very far into the future, which is cool. So, the chapter that made me cry is about a pig that is being used for medical research trying to find a cure, and it learns how to talk because of the research. And then it goes on to form a relationship with the researchers and like tries to figure out its place in the world. And I don't want to spoil anything, of course, but by the end of that story, I was sobbing harder than I can remember crying at a book for a really long time. And so, in the acknowledgments at the end of the book, the author specifically mentions readers reaching out to him on Instagram about that chapter and how much it made them cry. So, I know that I'm not alone in that experience, but oh my god, I cried so hard. Overall though, like yeah, this book really rules and I definitely recommend it. I he also talks about in his acknowledgments like yeah, I know given the state of the world, like this isn't going to be a book that everybody's going to want to pick up, but for those of you who are like, yeah, I can read about a pandemic right now, then I think this is like the book that you should choose for that. Next is favorite book to movie adaptation, and I chose The Green Knight. I haven't read the original text and I don't know if I plan to, but I did definitely enjoy this movie. I watched it with a friend and that helped me like actually try to pay attention and think of some kind of analysis and critical thinking about it. I don't watch a lot of movies and I also like don't usually pay a lot of attention when I do. Just like it's not my favorite thing, not my favorite way to consume media. Um, and I'm not nearly as good at like trying to analyze movies as I try to be at other things, but at the bare minimum, I thought it was really beautiful. I stayed interested the whole time. And there was a lot of things that my friend and I talked about, like as we were watching and afterwards. Um, so I think it was really cool. And sorry that I don't have more to say about it, but I just don't know what to say about movies. So there you go. Next is favorite post or video that you've made this year. I wrote some short stories. I keep hoping that I'll get to a point where I can start writing a new book, but it hasn't really happened yet. Um, but yeah, I've been writing some short stories involving the characters from When We Walked in Memory, and in particular, I had like two goals. I wanted to go back and try to write a sex scene for the main two characters in the romance, Frauke and Corentin. I had debated whether it should be in the book itself, and I ultimately decided not to. I just decided like the way that the scene went where I might have had it. I just liked it better without any sex scene in it. But I still was like, it was just in the back of my mind, like I wanted to try to write something for them. I find writing sex scenes very hard, and it also just felt like this was something that had to like hit the right beats emotionally. And so it was something that I really wanted to try to like get back to and like challenge myself to try to write. And I felt like what I come up with, like it felt kind of true to the spirit of the book, true to the spirit of their relationship, and like the way that they're just kind of working to figure things out together. So yeah, I wrote that and I posted that. And then I also have been writing some short stories exploring more of Frauke's life before the book starts, and in these kind of like hypothetical possibilities of the other ways that her life could have gone. Um, I wanted to flesh out the other apprentices who she lives with and just kind of use the writing to work out more of my thoughts about just kind of the things that I think about like 24/7 all the time, like just these ideas of like trauma and bodily autonomy and sexual autonomy and reproductive autonomy, like what survival and resistance may look like in extremely oppressive circumstances, like how complicated that can be or how it may not look the way that people want it to or expect it to. Um, and I actually I wasn't sure if I wanted to post them for a while because they feel like very like personal, and I know that they're also very dark, um, in a way that the book itself isn't quite as much. Like I think the book starts out in a bad place and then just things, get more hopeful as it goes. But I did ultimately decide to post them with like a bit of a content warning that basically says what I just said. Yeah, like I said, these are things that I like think about a lot and care about a lot, and so writing is one of the ways that I kind of explore them and work through them and try to say things that are worth saying about them. So I did try decide to post them because of that. Sorry if the angles have changed, but I just realized that my bunny mug has been in the shot when I haven't been holding it. And this prompt is for the most beautiful book that you've bought. So I really wanted you to be able to actually see the book and not have something blocking it. So the book that I chose is Memories of Ash by Intisar Kanani. She is one of my favorite young adult fantasy writers. She writes these very thoughtful, like empowering stories with these really like brave, passionate, compassionate girls who are just wonderful heroines set in these Middle Eastern inspired worlds. This is the second book in a trilogy that's called the Sunbolt Chronicles, and it's about a girl who's a thief who has to hide her magic, and she like gets entangled in this secret rebellion against her city's corrupt leader. And Intisar Kanani has done a combination of self-publishing and traditional publishing, and this is one of the self-published series that she's been re-releasing with a Kickstarter funding, with just as you can see, like really lovely covers and art, and just like they're very beautiful, high quality books. And so yeah, I contributed to the Kickstarter, and I got my copy this year, and I'm really happy with it. I love all of her books, and I can't wait to see what she does next. For anybody who is interested, I say please check out her stuff. If you like her, support her Patreon and her Kickstarters, because I just think she's a incredibly lovely person, like super kind, who has been doing something really special in young adult fantasy, and I just think she deserves a lot of success. So that's my plug for the video, is please check out Intisar Kanani. And the last prompt of this video is something that you absolutely need to read before the end of the year. I don't think that I have anything that I absolutely need to read, but one thing that I really do want to keep working on is a book called The Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook by Chris Germer and Kristen Neff. So mindful self-compassion is basically a practice or like a modality that helps people foster more compassion for themselves through the practice of mindfulness. And this is a workbook by two of its founding researchers slash therapists slash psychologists. It is something that mindful self-compassion is something that I've been practicing for a while now, and it has helped me a lot and really changed my life a lot. And it's something that I want to be able to do with clients, when I get to that point. Um, I've been working through this workbook at a very slow pace because I want to make sure that I'm actually like internalizing and practicing each lesson as opposed to just like, skimming the prompts and not actually like, doing the journal or anything like that. So I'm going slow but steady, and I want to keep making progress on it. Um, we'll see. I don't know if I'll finish it by the end of the year, so I don't know. Yeah, we'll see if I finish it, but I would at least like to make more progress on it and just keep up the practice because it's one that I think is really wonderful and can be super transformational. So, not to end like on a like on a self-help note or anything, but this is just a fun combination of things that you get on this channel, I guess. Um, I guess that's it for this video. I'm really excited because I sat down the other day and actually worked out like a bit of a schedule for things that I want to keep putting out, and I have a good idea of what I want to do next and then what I want to do after that. So there might be some semblance of like order happening on and with my videos now. No guarantees, but we'll see. In any case, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you like. I think I've forgotten to say that in like every single video that I've made so far, but I'm saying it now. I'll have links to all my various stuff in the description, and I don't know, I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. No, I think this is probably the best like outro of the video ever, and we're just gonna leave it at that. Thanks for watching again, and take care.